Okay, good evening, everyone. My name's Amanda Sutton. I'm the Events and Marketing Director for Bookworks, your 36-year-old independent bookstore in the North Valley of Albuquerque. We're very pleased to be here tonight with one of our favorite authors and a loyal customer of ours, Anne Hillerman. Before we get started, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's happening at Bookworks. As you may have heard, we've made a grand announcement of our reopening. That will be happening on April 24th, which is Independent Bookstore Day. What a great time to reopen our store after 13 months of curbside service. We will still be offering curbside service, so if you can't or don't want to wear a mask and come inside, we're happy to bring books out to the curb for you. You can still order books on our website. Our website is our name without the O's, so it's bkwrks.com. These next couple of weeks, we have curbside service 4 days a week, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday from 10 to 2, and also on Wednesday from 2 to 6. Now, when we reopen on Saturday, April 24th on Independent Bookstore Day, we will be open from 10 to 4 that day, and then Tuesday through Saturday from 10 to 4 from here forward. That is barring no COVID explosions, which we're all keeping our fingers crossed that it's only going to get better. So that means we're going to be closed on Sundays and Mondays. So come do your shopping Tuesday through Saturday at Bookworks or your favorite local independent bookstore. As I mentioned, April 24th is Independent Bookstore Day. It's a great day to support Bookworks, Collected Works, Maria's Bookshop, whatever your favorite hometown bookstore is. Around the country, there are these small shops, most of whom have robust websites now because of COVID. So if you're not going to shop with us, please do shop at another local bookstore. It's events like these and your patronage that helps us stay open. And for us, that's been 36 years. So please consider buying Anne's book from Bookworks. We have some signed book plates we can pop in there, or you can get a signed copy from Collected Works. But let me tell you, you're buying the book from one of the stores, especially the store who's hosting the event, is integral to us being able to continue having events like this. We've hosted Anne, I think, for every book in this series. So we're happy to be here tonight with the latest, STAGAZER. I'll tell you a little bit about Anne. You probably know a lot about her already if you're here. She was a journalist before she became a novelist. She has won a Spur Award for Best First Mystery from the Mystery Writers of America. She's won the Mountains and Plains Bookseller Award for Best Nonfiction. That was the book she did with her late husband, Don Strell, called Tony Hillerman's Landscapes. I believe that's one of Don's wonderful photos behind her now. She's also won the New Mexico Press Women's Association awards for editorials and the Zia Award from them. She's won a New Mexico Arizona Book Award, and she's been a finalist in the Oklahoma Book Awards, the home state of her late father, the Tony Hillerman, who I'm sure you have all heard of and probably read widely. All right, we've got STAGAZER on the docket. The other books include Spider-Woman's Daughter, Rock with Wings, Song of the Lion, Cave of Bones, and The Tale Teller. Many of those are available in paperback now. During the event, I'll put a link in the chat that will take you to all of Anne's books so you can buy a copy of each. Okay, we're going to start out with a little conversation. Anne is going to read to us from STAGAZER. And then if you have a question that comes up for you, you can type that into the chat, or you can raise your hand at the end of the event. I will moderate a question and answer. Okay, let's get started. Anne, thank you so much for joining us virtually from your living room. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you. I have to say, I so appreciate Bookworks for having hosted me. The first presentation we did was that wonderful photo book. I think we did it at the Chemo. And it's always a pleasure to be with you. And it was really nice to not have to drive down there in traffic today. So I think there are good things to be said about Zoom.
Absolutely. And I love that really anyone from around the country can come to this event. You don't have to be in Albuquerque or Santa Fe to drive to us. So we're happy to see so many people here. We've got about 60 people on the line. If you'd like to tell us in the chat where you are right now, that's always kind of fun to look at after the fact. So Anne, tell us a little bit about where we have left off and where Stargazer launches in this series.
I'd be glad to. So Stargazer is the sixth book in my continuation of the Jim Chi, Joe Leaphorn, Bernadette Manuelito saga. The book before this was The Tale Teller. And The Tale Teller was very important to me in terms of setting the stage for Stargazer. When I was doing the research for Tale Teller, I realized that there is a little island of Navajo culture in south central New Mexico known as the Alamo Reservation. And there are a lot of stories about how that Navajo community got established there. One story is that they were always there, that the holy people put them there, and that was just meant to be their home. Other stories have to do with the Long Walk, which was one of the keynote themes in the Tale Teller. So anyway, that's kind of how those books mesh together. Because I'm juggling three main characters, Jim Chi, Joe Leaphorn, and Bernie Manuelito, I try to alternate so each of them has the time to be the main crime solver, and the other two are working on subplots. So Stargazer, was time again for Bernie Manuelito to take the lead. So in addition to the Alamo Reservation, the other fascinating thing about this part of New Mexico is an astronomy facility known as the Very Large Array. And at the Very Large Array, there are huge telescopic discs mounted on railroad tracks, and they adjust the discs to listen to low frequency signals from space. Basically, they're like radio waves. And the Very Large Array was one of the first places where black holes were discovered. It's really a fascinating spot, and it's full of its own mystery. So it was just ready-made for a mystery writer. So I guess that's kind of the background of the book. And I have to say, every book holds special challenges for me. And one of the challenges of Stargazer, well, two of the challenges. One of the challenges was that the Navajo Reservation is a long way from where Bernadette Manuelito lives in Shiprock, New Mexico. So Bernie needs to do a lot of driving. And of course, anyone who lives on the Navajo Nation does a lot of driving because it's a long way from here to there, no matter where you're going. So Bernie has maybe 2.5 hours in the car as she's going from Shiprock down to Socorro to work with another deputy sheriff to help solve this crime. So I had to think of how I could best use that time in the car. And in one scene, Bernie uses it to interview a woman who's her friend who has confessed to a murder that Bernie is sure she didn't commit. And in other driving adventures, Bernie takes time to explore the plants that grow along the road, but also to really think through the crime and try to figure out why it's so hard for her to figure out who did it. So that's kind of a long answer to your short little question, Amanda.
That's fine. We like long answers around here. We're good listeners.
Good.
I love the setting that you chose here. The VLA and that part of New Mexico, one of my personal favorite places to be. I believe the Alamo Reservation, isn't that what's sort of known as the checkerboard part of the Navajo Res that kind of butts up against white lands?
Yes, it does. And against BLM land and against railroad property. The closest other Navajo community to it is Tohajale. And that's
Oh,
another little isolated Navajo settlement. So because of the isolation, it was easy for me as a novelist to come up with a reason that Bernie had to be down there, because they only have a few cops and one of them gets hurt and one of them is on vacation. And so Bernie gets called to transport this prisoner. And then, as often happens in mysteries, one thing leads to another. And next thing you know, there's mayhem everywhere.
of course, of course. And other than spending a lot of time in the car, it sounds like, what kind of evolution or developments can we see in the character of Bernie in this book that might differ a bit from the previous ones? Maybe
Well,
without giving too much away.
I love that question. So in this book, Bernie, well, I think even in Tellteller, Bernie's getting a little restless. Bernie is bright and ambitious, and she's thinking, gee, I really love diving into these big crimes and figuring out who did it and what their motivation was and bringing them to justice. So Bernie has been thinking about leaving the patrol work, which she also really loves because of the variety and because it gives her a chance to relate one-on-one with so many different people. Anyway, she's been thinking of leaving that to become a detective, a criminal investigator. And so part of what happens in this book is that when she has spare time doing all that driving, she's kind of thinking about the pros and cons of this and thinking, on the one hand, she would enjoy the challenge. On the other hand, she has her mom who needs her attention, her sister who needs a firm hand, and then, of course, her marriage to Jim Chi, which is really important to her. So, yeah, it was fun as I was developing the plot to also kind of weave in this personal stuff. I have to say, I feel like I know these characters. I mean, I feel like they kind of live next door to me. And and particularly during the pandemic, a lot of the revision I did on this book was when we were all in isolation. And it was so wonderful to have these imaginary friends who were with me every day.
Absolutely. Now, did you get to spend any time in the car yourself visiting the VLA, or did COVID sort of put a damper on that?
Luckily, I had done I would have loved to have gone back there and to have spent more time on the Alamo Reservation. But I had done a lot of the research and a lot of the writing of this book before the isolation of the pandemic happened. So in a way, I was really, really, really lucky about that. And the other wonderful thing, although readers didn't think it was so wonderful, but this book was originally scheduled to come out last year. And the editor I had worked with for the previous 5 books had retired, so I had a new editor for this book. She and I were just getting acquainted when chaos hit us all, and she had a lot of interesting, good ideas for this book. And so, and I appreciated her insights. So we mutually agreed that it would be better to put off publication till this year. And I'm so glad we did. I think the book is better. And I think people in general are just feeling more optimistic and maybe more ready to go out and spend some money on books. We'll see.
Let's hope so. Well, I'm
Yes.
glad to hear that a fresh set of eyes was good for your work. Have you found that over time these books are easier to write, harder to write? How has that process been for you as a writer?
Oh, I would like to, in some ways they're easier because I know the characters better.
Mhm.
And the other way they're easier is that I have a little more confidence in myself as a storyteller and a problem solver. And when I find that I'm going around in a cul-de-sac, I know that ultimately I'll find my way out and the book will get finished. So that part is easier. But basically, every story has its own challenges. A lot of them are challenges I don't realize when I'm first starting the writing process. But then as things move on, I realize things that I probably should have thought of when I started that I didn't think of. But for me, that kind of creative challenge is what makes it fun and what keeps my batteries charged as a writer.
That makes sense. It's sort of a mystery in and of itself, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, well, I want to leave some time for questions at the end from the audience. And I know that you're also wanting to read us a little bit. So are you ready to do that?
I would love to. I'd like to. I wanted to start with kind of a disclaimer. In my first book, the first book involved Lieutenant Joe Leaphorn basically as a crime victim. And so most of the readers who had followed the series knew a lot about Joe Leaphorn. After that, most of the victims were unknown people. The reader and didn't come across them until they had already been killed. So in Stargazer, I thought, gee, it would be fun to do something different. So in this book, I open with a little introduction about the person who becomes the crime victim. So I wanted to read you just a little bit of this. And this is the crime that Bernadette Manuelito then that occupies her for most of the book. And she doesn't have a chance to meet this guy until he's dead. But I thought it would be kind of nice to let the readers have a little bit of insight into him. So this is from the very beginning, and I'll just read you a little bit of this. And then I'm going to read you another chapter that has to do with Joe Leaphorn. Okay. He knew he was a lucky guy. First of all, how many people loved their jobs, made good money, and could honestly say their work had changed the way people looked at the world? He'd recently returned to a part of the planet he loved, a place where the night sky shone with brilliance. He was proud of their fine son, although he had to give his estranged wife and her brother credit for raising him. The woman he'd married 20 years ago remained lovely and engaging, and now he'd moved closer to her. He hoped he could recapture her affection. His current girlfriend, a fellow scientist, was just a placeholder. That night's dinner date began encouragingly, two old friends catching up face to face. He sipped a glass of Cabernet, but she stayed with sparkling water. She asked about his work and listened with attention to the details of his research on black holes and gravity. He offered simplified versions of his latest discovery and a knotty issue with his colleagues. She posted interesting questions and laughed at his jokes. She mentioned how she enjoyed her own work and being close to family again. Her smile convinced him he could persuade her to give their relationship another chance. But as their dinner drew to a close, he began to have doubts. When he reached for the check, she said they should split the bill and didn't want to back down. The heat of her outrage over something he viewed as trivial stirred memories of other fights. She stomped out of the restaurant while he paid. The woman wasn't all sweetness. He opened the passenger door and she slid in, as lithe and graceful as he remembered, and still angry. Although they had talked on the phone periodically about their son, he hadn't seen her for years before that evening. He was struck by how she had aged into her beauty. She'd gained some attractive womanly curves, which, along with the shimmers of gray in her smooth dark hair, added to her appeal. So they go on in the car, and then he decides that she wants to talk to him about getting divorced. Okay, so I'm going to read you just a little of this. Okay. I thought you still loved me, he said. At least I hoped you did. No, her voice grew louder. I haven't been in love with you for a long, long time. You've got a girlfriend. You're a bright guy when it comes to looking at the stars, but not so much when it comes to dealing with people. Why do you always have to be so difficult? We should have divorced years ago. You're breaking my heart. Your boyfriend must have put you up to this. You have a boyfriend, don't you? That's none of your stinking business. She spit out the words. I know you still care about me. I'm fighting you every step of the way. He clenched the steering wheel until he had his emotions under control. I could turn your life into living hell. Don't make me do that. The darkness hid his tears, but he knew she heard the ragged edges of despair in his voice. You're pathetic. I don't have to take your craziness anymore. I'm finished with this and with you. That was when he remembered the gun. So that is from the first chapter. And then I wanted to read you just a little bit from the Joe. This is part of the Joe Leaphorn story. And as people who followed the series might remember, poor Joe had a head injury in Spider-Woman's Daughter, which really affected his ability to talk. So he has some trouble speaking in English, not so much in Navajo. So this is from kind of midway in the book. And Joe is working on several different assignments for the Navajo police. And he also is wrestling with a request from his housemate, Louisa, which has made him very uneasy. Okay. Leaphorn realized that Louisa had forgotten the books she wanted to return and took them with him since the library was on the way. He put the books on the seat next to him, moving the poster of the missing woman he'd been given in Gallup. Before he started the truck, he noticed someone parked across the street in the shadow of a Siberian elm. The car was hard to miss. The gray passenger door stood out from the deep green of the rest of the vehicle. The rear tail light was covered with thick plastic, and the front end looked like someone had backed a truck into it. He drove past, wondering who had parked there and why. The car looked empty, but when he checked the rearview mirror a few minutes later, it was behind his pickup, headed in the same direction. A person with a white ball cap sat at the wheel. Leaphorn pulled over, and the car behind him did the same. He waited. The driver waited too, and Leaphorn felt his irritation rising. He always carried a gun, and in situations like this, he was thankful for its reassurance. As he opened his truck door, the suspicious car pulled onto the road and drove ahead. He caught a better glimpse of the driver, a short man wearing sunglasses. He slammed the door shut and continued toward the police station. By the time he backed into a parking spot with a visitor sign, he'd calmed down from greatly annoyed to moderately disturbed. When he'd first retired, Leaphorn still felt at home at headquarters. Now, many of the people he'd worked with had also retired or moved on. Even the building had been remodeled. Coming here today made him feel older. He smiled to see Carla at work at her desk. "Lieutenant Leaphorn, you aren't using your cane today." She spoke in Navajo. "Yate, this man is getting stronger. I'm glad I caught you. I just got back from a week's vacation, so now I have more to do than ever. You remember how that goes." He didn't. He never took off more than a day or two at a time when he served on the force. He loved that job. So anyway, that story moves on, but I just wanted to kind of reassure people who've been worried about Leaphorn that he's doing even better in this book than he was in The Taleteller.
Oh, good. We're glad to hear that.
Yeah.
And how was that, taking your father's characters and writing them anew or not anew? How has that been for you over the course of the series?
Oh, challenging, but lovely. One of the reasons that I decided to continue the series was that I had such affection for Jim Chee and Joe Leaphorn. I can remember that, well, let me go back. The first Joe Leaphorn book, The Blessing Way, was released 50 years ago.
Wow.
2020 was the 50th anniversary of the debut of Joe Leaphorn. So when I was a girl, I can remember, we would be sitting at the dinner table, and like a lot of families, we'd go around and, mom would say, "So how was your day and what happened in school and how was football practice," or whatever. And we would all talk. And then when it was my dad's turn, sometimes he would say, "Oh, I'm having such trouble with Joe today." And it's like, yeah, we know Joe Leaphorn. He was like, part of the dinner table conversation, part of our family. So when my dad died, as much as I missed my dad, I think I missed the characters. And I was as heartbroken that the stories would end, almost as heartbroken as I was about losing my father. So after a while, I thought, well, there's nothing I can do about Tony's death, but maybe I can try to keep these characters alive. And one thing that really sort of inspired me was the character of Bernadette Manuelito. And I always thought that my father could have raised her up into being a full-fledged crime solver. In his book, she's mostly a rookie cop. She makes a bunch of mistakes. She's madly in love with Jim Chi. She's not really a first-rate law enforcement person. So, and after Skeleton Man, which was my dad's second to last novel. In that book, Bernie does pretty well. She finds a woman who is endangered. She finds some stolen diamonds. She rounds up the bad guys. It looks like maybe finally she's gonna become a honest to goodness cop. But then I think because Dad loved those male characters so much, this is happening in the Grand Canyon. There's a flash flood. There's chaos all around, and Jim Chi shows up magically, and well, not quite magically, but anyway, Jim Chi shows up and saves Bernie, saves the day. And I remember talking to my dad after reading that and saying, I think readers would really love to see Bernie, join the guys and, become a full-fledged crime solver, stand up on her own 2 feet and not stop all this rookie stuff. And he gave me this little sweet smile that dads give their daughters. And he said, "Oh, honey, what an interesting idea." But in retrospect, I'm glad that he didn't do anything with it, because then when I decided that I might see if I could write a mystery, the character of Bernadette Manuelito really gave me a wonderful place to start, and a wonderful place to be able to write about these characters that I loved without having to pretend to be Tony Hillerman. So I'm really thankful that Dad created her, and that he kind of left her in that sort of limbo where she was interesting, but not really a first-rate detective. So
Right.
yeah, it's been wonderful. And I think the minor characters too were great. I mean, Cowboy Dashi, who I've used in some books, Captain Largo, a lot of those characters really had such heart, and they were so interesting. I was glad to be able to kind of bring them along as I continued the series. And of course, because I was using Bernie as a main character, I had to kind of fill in her backstory. So I needed to create a mother for her, and of course, and a little sister who would give her grief. So all of that was really fun. And some other colleagues at the police station who could kind of be her compadres. So yeah.
What fun. He birthed Bernadette for you, and then you get to come up with her life, essentially.
Yeah.
So other than, okay, you've obviously incorporated some of your father's characters and then been able to launch Bernadette into the full-fledged, multi-dimensional woman that she is. So you've talked about your father's stories and how much a part of your life those were at home. But how have you been able to separate yourself? This question comes from Holly Harrison. How have you been able to separate yourself as a writer from your father, his history of writing, and his, absolute legacy? He's an icon now, right?
Right.
So how have you been able to forge your own path as a writer?
I think it was kind of inevitable, because I am a different person. And I think also bringing a woman's perspective to the series, both through the eyes of Bernadette Manuelito and through my own eyes. I know there are a lot more complicated relationships in my books than there were in my father's books. I think my father had a lot more maybe more action, although my books have action too, and more kind of well, of course, poor Jim Chi had all those girlfriends in my father's books, and luckily I don't have to write about that. But let's see. The other thing that's different, I try to purposely take the reader to parts of the Navajo Nation that my dad didn't write about. In Rock with Wings, I was able to use Monument Valley. In Stargazer, I'm able to explore a whole other part of the Navajo Nation that my dad never wrote about. So that's been really fun. In Cave of Bones, I was able to take readers out to the Malpais and talk about some of the wonderful native stories that have to do with the lava flows. So yeah, that has been really intentional on my part. It seems to me that there's so much beautiful, beautiful landscape, and that people who aren't from the Southwest tend to think, that it's all just kind of barren desert. So it's been really fun to add that kind of travel log and geography into my work.
Now, when you were a child, did you all go out to the res a lot? Did you study Navajo language. How did that figure into your formative years, given that your father wrote so extensively about Dinétah?
Well, probably the most formative thing was when I was growing up. My dad's was mostly still in journalism. So I think his love for good stories, nonfiction stories, his curiosity about what made the world work, all of that had a really deep impact on me. And also just his love for good writing. I remember when our family started out in Santa Fe. And then when I was halfway through the 8th grade, my dad got a job teaching, well, first of all, working in administration, and then ultimately teaching journalism at the university. And before he could teach journalism, he had to get his master's in English. So he took all these wonderful courses. And sometimes he would come home and he would be so excited about what he was reading that he would, read it. I say read it to us. My younger siblings weren't all that interested, but I was fascinated. And so I think just being exposed to really his love for good writing, all different kinds of good writing, had a profound effect on me when I decided that I would want to become first a journalist and then a nonfiction writer and now a fiction writer. But yeah, we did go to the Navajo Nation a lot. My dad loved exploring and loved New Mexico and Arizona, the whole Southwest. And I remember one time we went to Canyon de Chelly, and this was before before the Navajo Nation was doing tours of Canyon de Chelly, when just average people could drive their cars down into the canyon. So we were in our little station wagon, and me and my 5 brothers and sisters, and we get to the entrance, and the guy who's in charge of the national park says, well, you all be careful down there because we've had reports that there's a lot of quicksand. And all of us kids, our eyes are big. We're thinking, oh my gosh, alligators, maybe we'll get stuck in quicksand. But no, we didn't get stuck in quicksand. Anyway, I think my dad's just his love for the Southwest and his real passion for the Navajo people and for the wonderful land that they call sacred really just had such an intrinsic and profound effect on me from an early age that it just seemed kind of natural for me to be able to want to continue his stories. And I was so lucky that the people who had loved his writing were able to accept Bernie and accept my new interpretation of the characters and come on over with us.
That's awesome. I was just imagining that whole scene, a large, maybe 1960s, 1970s station wagon, maybe with some wood paneling, full of kids, Tony Hillerman driving down to the bottom of Canyon de Chelly.
Yeah, it was great. It was really great.
And I know that Tony was widely regarded, accepted, highly thought of by Navajo people. Have you enjoyed that same sentiment with your work? What's the reception been of this series?
Yes, I have. Thank you for asking that question. When I do readings, say at the Farmington Public Library or at the Gallup Library, the audience will maybe be 30% Navajo. And afterwards, one thing that really delights me is if there will be, say, a Navajo woman in her 30s or 40s and her mom in her 50s or 60s or older than that. And then the daughter who's maybe a teenager or maybe a little bit younger. And they'll all come up to me afterwards and they'll say, oh, we love Bernie Manuelito. And it's high time that, somebody really represented how strong we Navajo women are. And then they'll say, can we take our picture with you? It's like, oh, sure. That kind of response really, really delights me.
Yeah, Navajo culture is matriarchal, right? So women figure hugely in their culture. Why do you think that your father didn't make Bernadette a more well-rounded character? Was it like a generational thing, or that he couldn't quite get into that persona like he could the male characters?
I think it was a combination of that. Just between the 60 of us who are listening to this, my dad often said that he had trouble writing about women. And I think probably the best writing he did about a woman was in The Thief of Time. And you all may remember that was the book in which Joe Leaphorn's wife, Emma, has just died. And Joe is just stricken by grief and he's full of memories of Emma. And really, Joe's memories of Emma really bring Emma to life. I think more so than any of the other woman characters that my dad ever wrote about.
Hmm.
And it's funny because, my dad was married for more than 50 years. He and my mom really were enormously fond of each other. And I've got two sisters. My dad had a sister. My mom had two sisters. So it wasn't like he, grew up with just all guys around. I don't know, and I think he maybe underestimated his ability to write about women, and the fact that writing about the guys came so easily to him, he maybe didn't have a lot of incentive to explore that part of his own creative nature.
Interesting. He maybe felt he could write more authentically about the male experience or something.
Yeah. When and if I get to heaven, I'll be sure and ask him about that.
And what about your mom? Was she able to read some of your books, and what were her thoughts?
Yes. When I first had the idea that I might continue the series, I asked my mom, if she would be comfortable with that. And she said, well, sure, give it a try, see how it works out. So when I had finished what I thought was a pretty solid draft of the first novel, Spider Woman's Daughter, I asked my mom if she would take a look, and she said, oh, sure. And I'll never forget, this was like the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. So I printed it all out, back in the day when everything had to be printed out, and gave her the pages. And then I thought, well, this is wonderful timing, because now I can, celebrate Thanksgiving, get ready for Christmas. And maybe after the first of the year, she will be done with it. And, then we can have a quiet conversation. So she called me like the Saturday after Thanksgiving. And I thought, oh, shoot, there must have been blank pages, or, I thought, there was some technical problem. So I said, well, hi, Mom. And she said, oh, I just wanted to tell you, I finished reading your novel. So of course, my heart is in my chest, pounding, pounding, pounding. I said, well, what did you think? She said, well, I think your dad would be proud of you. It's like, it's funny. It doesn't matter how old you are. Hearing those words just, make your heart sing. So yeah. And then she did have some really good advice for me, which she offered very gently, as was always her style. So then with the next book, Rock with Wings, I showed it to her, and she had some good ideas. And I remember she was in the hospital. She'd had some surgery, and I was visiting her, and I was just having a hard time coming up with a title for that book. And so she and I were sitting there, and she said, what about Rock with Wings? Rock with Wings is the Navajo name for Shiprock, which is where a lot of the story was set. I thought, yeah, perfect. Why didn't I think of that? So anyway, thanks, Mom.
That's what moms are for.
Right. I was really so lucky that she was still around when I was starting this series. She was such a great supporter. Oh, and I want to mention, there's an author named James McGrath Morris, who's writing a biography of Dad, which is going to be released by University of Oklahoma Press this fall. And part of his research, he was asking me a lot of questions about my mom. And I had maybe 80 tiny little notebooks, which were her reading journals. Every book, I think probably every book she read, she wrote down the author, the title, like a plot summary, and then 3 or 4 sentences about what she thought of it. And when James McGrath Morris looked at those notebooks, he thought, well, a lot of authors say their spouse was a great influence. He said, but I don't know any author who had a wife who was as well-read and as critical a reader as your mom was. So I was really pleased to see that she's going to get some nice attention in this new biography.
That's so cool. She sounds like a very studious editor.
Yeah, perfect. She was wonderful, really wonderful.
Yeah, we've heard about the James McGrath Morris book. I think it comes out in October, and we are planning a Bookworks event for that book. Maybe in person, maybe virtually, but do keep an eye out, because I'm sure come October we'll be doing a launch for that as well.
Good. Maybe I can be there.
That would be fabulous.
Yeah, I would love that.
We have a few questions in the chat. If anyone else has a question, please do go ahead and type it in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I will call on you. Okay, Karen Cox wants to know, she says, I heard that you changed the bad person because it wasn't working well. What happened?
That's a great question. So I was about 3/4 of the way done with this book, and I realized that the guy who I should say the person who I thought was the villain didn't do it. Didn't do it. I just could not wrap my head around the fact that this person would have murdered somebody. So here I am, I'm thinking, well, what happens next? But luckily, a character who had seemed like a minor character had a lot of sort of devious tendencies and kind of a dark side. So I thought, well, maybe I can, rather than rewriting the whole book or giving up in disgust, maybe I can go back and plant some clues about this character, and maybe that will work. And so I think it did work. And I'm hoping that a lot of readers will be as surprised as I was when they get to that turning point and kind of start to think, and wait, maybe this is a red herring. Maybe this person really isn't the villain, and maybe I need to kind of rethink how this whole story has evolved. So it was sort of terrifying when it happened, but I think it worked out well, and I think it really made the book stronger. So I hope when you guys read the book, I hope you will agree with me.
Okay, here's another question. This one's from Ramona. Your dad wrote some about Navajo and Hopi religious ceremonies, but I've noticed that you haven't done that in detail. Was that a deliberate choice?
Yes, it was. As an outsider, I don't feel comfortable writing about things that are so often so private and so influenced by generation of growing up with those ceremonies, growing up with those prayers. Maybe as the series continues and I make more deep contacts in, with Navajo people, I will feel more comfortable writing about that. But I don't want to make any bad mistakes, and I don't want to say anything that isn't accurate, and I don't want to cause any embarrassment to anyone. So that in a nutshell, those are basically the reasons that I don't do that.
That's good. I think that choice has a lot of integrity. As we all know, a lot of white people are writing about other cultures, and really you're kind of walking the fine line of cultural appropriation, right? So how do you find yourself navigating that?
If I'm dealing with something which I think might be sensitive, I talk it over with my Navajo friends and basically see what they think. And usually they are supportive of it. I mean, they say we think that what our culture has to say has a lot of value for the world in general. But if I get any hesitation, I don't do it, because I don't want people to feel exploited or embarrassed, and I don't want to get it wrong. And not having lived in that culture, I think it's easy. Nuances are complicated and difficult, and it's easier for me to write about to write about the other culture I'm learning about, which is the law enforcement culture. Although there's some what can I say, tightly held secrets there too, but it's a little easier to explore it.
Now, do you have real life law enforcement friends that you run things by too?
I do. I have both retired Navajo policemen and some a woman who worked a long time with the Santa Fe Police Department, who was really very, very helpful. I've used her for quite a few books. And then I have an FBI agent, retired FBI agent, who did a lot of work in Indian country, and his wife, who did a lot of work with domestic violence. Both of them have worked with me as consultants. Oh, and a U.S. Marshal. And probably other people I'm not remembering.
Sounds like you put a lot of time and effort into your research for the books. That's wonderful. Does anyone else have anything that they would like to ask Anne?
Well, I'd like to say something about research.
Sure.
In Stargazer, I did a lot of research on the work that goes on at the Very Large Array. I learned a lot about black holes and radio astronomy and low frequency waves, radio waves. And I also learned an awful lot about the Navajo view of the stars, which was really ultra fascinating. And just as the Very Large Array looks at a huge swath of the sky, so does Navajo starlore. And most of the stories I learned were those stories that come from the Greeks. And I imagine when those stories were first born, they also had big swaths of the sky. But I think as they've been translated and narrowed down, now we see the Belt of Orion, or we see the Big Dipper. Whereas Navajo starlore maybe have 3 or 4 big characters and really fascinating legends. So yeah, I could still be researching that. And it was a challenge to know when to stop, and then to not be writing a book on astronomy and starlore, but to actually remember that I was writing a mystery, and this was just kind of interesting but tangential information to helping the reader figure out who did it and why.